You begin.
So, hello, I'm Dr. Susan Langer, Doctor of Oriental Medicine from the Meridian Center for Holistic Medicine. And I have with me here today Gary Stewart, who is a certified family constellation practitioner. And he's been in practice for doing this work for nearly 10 years, over 10 years actually. And he has a wealth of experience and he's been helping many, many people. So I'm very excited to have him so that we can ask him some questions and discover exactly what this work is about. So Gary, thank you for coming here today.
Great. Well, thank you very much in this beautiful natural surroundings of Ojai. I'm very pleased to be here.
So I have some good questions for you that I know lots of people have been asking us, and they're probably on the edge of their seats wanting to know.
Okay.
So the first question I have is, what exactly is family constellation work?
Well, family constellation work was a process that was discovered by Bert Hellinger in the late 60s. So it's been in practice a lot in Europe for the past, 35, 40 years. And what he found is psychotherapy and different things weren't working. And what he discovered is by using a surrogate to be an issue or a dynamic that's showing up as a problem in someone's life, the real information about the invisible dynamic that's creating the problem shows itself during the constellation process. And while it's showing itself, it's actually transforming the energy that's alive from the whole family system and the family system's history that is expressing itself through the representative in a constellation, but it's also healing the client of carrying that invisible dynamic that's not serving them in their life.
So this is a big deal.
Yes, it is.
It's a really big deal. So what kind of issues can be addressed?
Well, many issues happen. One thing I forgot to add is that there's a knowing field that opens during the constellation process, and it really guides us to the answer and resolution, whether there's family trauma that was never resolved, whether it's something from World War II with a concentration camp in a Jewish family and the Nazis. Many traumatic things don't heal in the lifetime, then they're relegated to the future. So what we find is the grandchild or great-grandchild is carrying the pain of their ancestors. And this gives us a window into their lifetime and allows us to release that dynamic that's been contained, creating dysfunction, and it's just the energy dissipates, and then a functional, more whole human being happens as a result of it.
Wow. Well, so you've telling us what kind of themes then show up.
A lot of themes we find that are common is lost children, aborted or miscarried children, grief of the ancestors. A lot of people die under unusual circumstances, and it creates a shock in the family system. And what we find is every generation tries to carry that shock for their parents, for their grandparents. So what we find, one of the more common themes that show up is multi-generational grief. And the longer that Helen, I've trained with Bert Hellinger, and what he finds in his 30 years is that one of the most traumatic things any family goes through is grief. And unresolved grief manifests in many different ways in people's lives.
So when you talk about lost children, what do you mean by that?
So whether there was I find a lot with our ancestors, if there was a miscarriage and then the mother was deeply hurt that she lost maybe her first child, and then what we find is the first child born, which would be her second child, is traumatized by the event and can't get close to its mother. So therefore it creates a break in the mother line. Also, simultaneously, there's grief between the husband and wife over the lost child. And a lot of generations have ignored that lost child. So what we find as constellation facilitators in the process is to include that lost child, whether it's a surrogate representative or even a pillow. It gives a place to that missing person in the family system. And then no one has to carry the grief. The mother owns the grief. It can heal the marriage. And it also heals the client and gives them their proper place. So if there was a lost baby and then they were the first living child, we consider them the second child in the family. So everyone belonging and knowing their place has a profoundly healing effect on everybody.
That's amazing. What other traumatic events
A lot of human history comes up where we're really post World War II right now, even though we have other atrocities going on in Iraq or Africa or Darfur. What we find is a lot of World War II things are coming up, but the amazing thing about this, and Bert Hellinger has been interviewed by quantum physicists, we really see time as a circle. With the constellation process, we can enter the field of time at any point in the client's life. So somebody may be working on something, say they're working on their prosperity issue, and what gets uncovered is grief that the mother may be carrying over a lost brother in World War II, and that needs to be healed before the person, let's say, can be successful. So that's just one example of how the person thinks they have a money issue, but the knowing field that opens up during the constellation process shows us that it's all tied to grief. And either people are suffering as a result of that grief, or they're suffering for their mother because the grief is in the system. So by including even the dead person who might not have been either celebrated or given a place in the family because they departed quickly in a war scenario or disappeared, anything like that, that could happen, there's usually the future generations carry something for that person, but it's expressed in a negative way rather than a positive way.
Okay, so how does this process help the client?
Well, the client, number one, we all know our family story. I do, and I was totally amazed at what showed up in the field with my family stories. And the fact that in my personal life, what showed up is my father's youngest brother had died of an appendicitis in a hospital. Well, my grandparents ended up hating each other over it, blaming each other, got a bitter divorce. It tore apart the whole family. So when I started my work, I wasn't working on this issue, and something that happened 75 years ago is what showed up in my field. Of course, I inherited this uncle's name as my middle name, but along with that name comes a lot of baggage that's in the family system. So what I personally found in my healing is that this event was very traumatic for my grandparents, my father, who was a young teenage boy at the time, and it broke the whole family up and created lots of hostility and venomous hatred, and that has lingered in my family system for over 75 years. And that's just one event in both sides of my family that seems to be the strongest. The great thing about constellation work is the field tells you what the priority is to heal. I could have never figured that out in a million years. I knew factually that it was a big issue in the family, but the constellation field repeated it 5 times from different angles of each person involved in it. So it gives you tremendous compassion for the suffering your ancestors went through. It releases me from being that dead uncle, and it also gives my dead uncle a place in our family as the lost boy who died unexpectedly of an appendicitis.
Wow, that's a great story.
Yeah, that's just what happened with me.
Yes. Okay, so where does this leave us with the duality of existence?
Well, I think if you really look at what this shows us, that everything is interconnected, which I believe is the coming awareness of all of humanity, that there is no separation. There's no separation of the living and the dead, because we get answers from the other side all the time, very much like a shaman would go to the other side to bring back the missing piece. In a constellation, you have the same process. We get the hidden piece of information through a living representative, but the message from the other side has come through that great-grandmother, through that person, which creates tremendous healing. And that shows that we're one with all life, we're one with death. There's no time and space delineation, because we have access to historical things in a nanosecond if they show up in the client's family history. And it really shows us we're all one. One of the most profound insights that Bert has given the world, I believe, is that makes me a little sad, is that everything and everyone belongs. And that there really is no separation. If someone in your family grieves that lost child, then the whole family grieves that lost child. And that could go on for 10 generations until that child's brought into the system. If you have a black sheep in your family that was excluded or pushed out of the family system, there'll be a black sheep in every generation to keep the memory alive of that person who was pushed out or castigated or ostracized from the family. So if he shows one thing, it's everybody has a place and everyone belongs. And when you have that inclusive attitude, duality starts to disappear. And especially I went to great length to describe that in my book on the constellation process called Many Hearts, One Soul. It was an American view of Bert Hellinger's work and my experience with it for over 8 years when I wrote the book. And the more